Welcome, everyone. Welcome back to the fourth session of the Book of Deuteronomy, Telling and Retelling, Part 2, with Rabbi David Silber. This class is a continuation of Part 1 from this past fall. If you want to catch up on Part 1, you can do so on our YouTube channel. It is always a pleasure to be learning with Rabbi Silber, the dean and founder of Drisha, in this class, part of his ongoing series on Deuteronomy. Sources for today's class are from Sefer Dvarim and Sefer Shemot. If you have your own Tanakh or Chumash, you're certainly always welcome to use that. Otherwise, sources will be shared on screen. With that, I'm going to hand the mic over to Rabbi Silber.
Thank you very much. And so we're going to be looking at one of the central stories of the Torah. And we've seen already in previous meetings that when the book of Devarim tells a story, Moshe's telling or retelling the story of the desert, that every single story differs from what we originally read. And what was true in the past is certainly true of the present story that we'll be looking at, where there is a great difference between the initial story and the story that Moshe tells. The story that Moshe tells is in chapter 9 of Sefer Devarim, and the story I'm referring to is the episode of the Egel, the story of the golden calf. Now that's in chapter 9 of Devarim, and the story of the golden calf, which is one of the central stories of the Bible, actually, maybe once you get out of the book of Breshit, maybe the central story of the Torah. That's a story that begins in chapter 32 of the book of Shemot. Let me just begin by setting up the background to what we have here in the book of Devarim, which is chapter 9. And in chapter 9, Moshe begins this particular speech, Shema Yisrael, in chapter 9, verse number 1. And basically what Moshe says in the first several psukim here is that don't think that you are going to inherit the land and defeat these powerful peoples in the land because of your own righteousness. That's found in chapter 9, verse number 4. Al tamar b'lvavcha vadov Hashem Elohecha otam milfanecha leimar b'tzidkoti haviani Hashem l'reshet et haaretz hazot u'v'rishat hagoyim ha'eleh Hashem arisham mipanecha. So don't say, because of my righteousness, God has enabled me to dispossess the people of the land on account of their wickedness. Don't think that, says Moshe, because that's not true. Because in the very next verse, in verse number 5, Lo b'tzidkatcha u'v'yosher levavcha ta'bol ha'reshet et haaretzam. You're not ready to dispossess them because of your own righteousness, but rather two reasons. Number one, ki b'rishat hagoyim ha'eleh Hashem Elohecha marisham mipanecha. That's number one, because of the wickedness of the people. You're right about that. It's the wickedness of the people that is the reason for God wanting to dispossess them. And secondly, U'man hakim et hadavar Hashem nishba Hashem l'avotecha li'Avraham li'Yitzchak u'li'Yaakov. And then Moshe adds, and because of the promise, what God swore to Avraham, Yitzchak, and Yaakov, the covenant that we see in the book of Breshit, made with Avraham and restated, says the book of Devarim, both with Yitzchak and with Yaakov, called Brit Lavot. And those are the two reasons. And now Moshe goes on to pick up his main point over here, namely, it's not because of your righteousness. Moshe now repeats this. V'yadato, you should know, says Moshe. Ki lo b'tzidkacha Hashem Elohecha noten l'cha et ha'ar hazot l'rishta, ki am kshei oref ata. You should know, says Moshe, no, that not because of your righteousness is God allowing you to possess the land, this good land, for you are an am kshei oref, stiff-necked people, an unbending people. Now we'll come back to that word am kshei oref in our studies, because that's a very important term. What it sounds like, and this is, I think, in particular important in Sefer Devarim, but we encountered this earlier as well. Am kshei oref, a people that is stiff-necked, means a people that can't change. This will touch upon what is highlighted in the book of Devarim about the necessity of people's willingness to mend their ways, to change. We will come to this theme throughout the book. It's one of the themes of Sefer Devarim. So don't think that you're so righteous. Am Kshei Oref. You are people unable to change your negative ways. And now Moshe wants to demonstrate this. Zechor al tishkach. Here we have again these two words. Remember and don't forget. We've encountered this already several times in our past studies of Sefer Devarim. Et asher hiksavto at Hashem Elohecha bamidbar. How you angered God in the desert. And then Moshe adds, Lumin hayom asher yatzata me'eretz Mitzrayim. From the time that you left Egypt. Ad boachem ad hamakom hazeh. Until you came to this place, mamrim heitem im Hashem. You were mamrim. Here they translate defiant. One could say rebellious is another possibility. Mamrim heitem im Hashem. This is a very powerful statement. It didn't start yesterday. Says Moshe, you have a history from the very beginning, throughout, from the moment you left Egypt until this day, the end of the 40th year of the desert, you have been defiant or rebellious against God. So it's not a one-time kind of thing. It seems very fundamental to who you are. And now Moshe is going to single out one particular episode. Later he'll mention other episodes. Earlier he talked about the situation when he sent scouts into the land. But in this case, it's a lengthy description of this sin that Moshe singles out, which begins here in the very next verse, Uvechorev hiksavtem et Hashem. In Chorev, now Chorev in the book of Devarim we know is a synonym for Sinai. It's referring to Israel who was at Mount Sinai to receive the Torah. And we all remember, of course, that the reception of the Torah is highlighted earlier in this book, back in chapter 4. In fact, Moshe told the people that they are not to forget that experience of standing at Sinai and to teach their children, the next generation, etc. Now Moshe goes back to Chorev. But at Chorev itself, you cause God to be angry. Vayitanaf Hashem bachem lashmid etchem. And God was so angry, Vayitanaf, that God had determined to destroy you. When did this all take place? Paroti Ahara. When they went up to the mountain, says Moshe, Kachat luchot avonim luchot abrit, the tablets of stone, the tablets of the covenant, asher karat Hashem imachem, that God had made with you. The word karat means to cut, is often used in terms of a covenant. Like we have in English the same expression, to cut a deal, we say in English. So when it came to the tablets which were what could represent the covenant, but the tablets which were the 10 Dibrot, etc., which were, one could say, the basis of the covenant, was central to the covenant. It's an agreement to adhere to God's rules. I went up to the mountain, says Moshe, to bring those tablets down. I was on the mountain for 40 days and nights. I neither ate nor drank. And God gave me the stone tablets. Kituvim b'etzba Elohim, written with the finger of God. So Moshe says, I went up to the mountain to bring down the tablets written by God. And on these tablets were written all of those things that God spoke to you from the fire, B'yom HaKahal, on the day of the gathering. The Torah earlier had referred to the reception of the Torah at Sinai as the day of the Kahal, the day when the people gathered together, the day of congregation. So Moshe's up there for 40 days and 40 nights. And the next verse, at the end of 40 days, 40 nights, and God gave me, says Moshe, the tablets of stone, the tablets of the covenant. God handed them to me. And God said to me, quickly go down from here. The people you brought out of Egypt have corrupted themselves. They have quickly departed from the path that I commanded them to take. They made a molten image. So I'm on the mountain. God gives me the tablets. I'm there for 40 days and 40 nights. Then God says, go down. Your people have corrupted themselves. And then in the next verse, God continues to speak. Moshe didn't say anything. There's no response. God said to me at that time, I see these people. I know them. They're stubborn. They're unbending. Leave here, and I will destroy them. I wipe out their name. Under the heavens. That will make you a great and more powerful nation than they. So we all remember this, the story of the golden calf. Moshe's on top of the mountain to receive the tablets. To receive the Torah. And God informs Moshe that the people that he brought out of Egypt have corrupted themselves. And God makes an offer to Moshe. I'll create a nation out of you. I'll make a better nation out of you. Over here, the text continues. The Torah continues. I went down. I turned and went down the mountain. The mountain was all fire. I was carrying the two tablets of the covenant. Asitem lachem egel masecha, sartem mahem in aderech, asher tziva Hashem etchem. I came down the mountain, says Moshe, and behold, I saw that you in fact had sinned unto God. You had made yourself a molten calf. You had quickly departed from the path that God had commanded you. For I grabbed onto the two tablets, says Moshe. I threw them from my hands, I threw them down, and I broke them before you. You saw me break them. And I fell down. I fell down before God, as I had done earlier. 40 days and nights. I did not eat or drink for 40 days. All the sins you had committed to anger God. I was afraid, says Moshe, because of the great anger. God was so angry, God had planned to destroy you. But God listened to me. God accepted my prayer at that time. And as far as Aaron is concerned, God was also very angry. God wished to destroy Aaron. And I prayed for Aaron at that time. And the sin, which consists of you making the calf. I took it. And I burned it in fire. And I ground it up very well. Till it was as fine as dust. I took it, the dust, and I threw it into the brook that comes down from the mountain. This is Moshe's description here of the golden calf. Now the question is, how does this relate to the story of the golden calf that we encountered earlier in the book of Shemot, beginning in chapter 32? What differences are there between the golden calf episode in chapter 32 of Exodus and chapter 9 of Sefer Devarim? And then the question is, of course, what do we make of these differences? Because there are many differences between the two stories. And the key over here is to try to figure out what is the focus of each of the stories. And then, of course, to think about what is the significance of that? Why in Sefer Devarim does Moshe present it one way, and the book of Exodus presents it a different way? Before we get to that, and everybody should be looking at this, we'll go through this together and see what we can come up with as far as the distinctions are concerned. One of the questions I want to put out there in the very beginning is this. This is a basic question about Sefer Devarim in general, and that is, to what extent, when you're reading the book of Devarim, does the book of Devarim expect the reader to know the earlier stories? Is it that we never heard the story earlier? This is the story, and we, the reader, then go back to the earlier stories and say it doesn't seem to match up. It's a different story. Or do we say something else? Do we say that actually, when you're reading the book of Devarim, the book of Devarim is written in such a way that the assumption is that whoever's reading it is aware that there's another story. Now, my own personal position is the second. I think that in Sefer Devarim, we can assume that the book of Devarim is assuming that who's ever reading Sefer Devarim is aware of the other story, and that there are details, perhaps, of the first story that are assumed by Sefer Devarim. I don't want to get into proving that right now. I think that is the case, though. Not only in the story of the golden calf, but I think in all the stories, especially in the very beginning of this book, the story of this episode of the spies, etc. I think it makes a lot of the verses make sense if the reader already knows of the earlier story. I think the story of the spies sort of assumes knowledge of the earlier story. But let's go back now and take a look at the story of the golden calf, which begins in chapter 32 of the book of Exodus. And I'd like you to look at it, and let's see if we can come up with some of the differences between the presentation of the golden calf in Shemot and the presentation of the golden calf in our book in Sefer Devarim. This is in chapter 32. I'll just start by reading it, and we can look at it ourselves, and we'll all talk up and see what we can what we come up with over here. So chapter 32, chapter 31, the very last verse of chapter 31 just says, "Vayitenu Moshe kichaloto v'daber ito b'har Sinai shnei luchot ha'edut luchot even ketuvim b'yatzva Elohim." Okay, so chapter 31 ended with the verse that Moshe went up the mountain. Moshe goes up the mountain in the book of Exodus in chapter 24. And here, and now at the end of chapter 31, we're told that he was given these tablets of edut, tablets of testimony. Here they say the pact. So it's interesting, the word edut is used over there. Now, what happened in between chapter 24 and Moshe goes up the mountain and the end of chapter 31, where we have this verse of God gave to Moshe these tablets? What happens in chapters 25, 26, 27, 28, 29, 30, and most of chapter 31? Well, actually, these are the parashiyot that we're actually reading this time of year in the shul, in the Beit Knesset. These are the instructions how to build the Mishkan, the tabernacle, the Mishkan. Those instructions are given to Moshe in all these chapters, and conclude with, of course, the very end of chapter 31, instructions about Shabbat. V'shamru v'nei Yisrael et Shabbat. The Mishkan and Shabbat are adjoined, one after the other. And at the end of all of this, and when you read, of course, the book of Exodus, you can understand why maybe Moshe was on the mountain for 40 days. Because there's a lot of details over here in building the Mishkan. The Mishkan is very complicated, how to build this whole edifice, the different pieces of it, the different materials that we use to build it, etc. Maybe Moshe was given other things on the mountain as well. But in any way, in the book of Exodus, the story of the golden calf is introduced by this same verse, but it's also introduced by all the instructions to how to build the Mishkan. That's what Moshe is going to come down with these instructions, and the goal was come down the mountain. You have these tablets, and you're going to build God's sanctuary. You're going to build this edifice in which the structure which God is present, and God is dwelling amidst the people. That is the goal. And now we come, however, there's a problem, and the problem is the story of the golden calf, which will prevent the Mishkan from being built. So let's start with chapter 32, verse number 1, and think about the differences between the two stories. There are many differences between them, and let's just begin with that. Before we start with this, does anybody have any questions to this point?
40 days, twice 40 days. There were 40 years in the desert. And if I
Right.
remember correctly, there were 400 years in Egypt. Is there a significance to that number?
Yes, there is, of course. There's 40 years in the desert and 40, as you say, 40 days, etc. And the spies went in for 40 days. Spies went in for 40 days, and in the book of Shoftim, the judges, most of the judges are judges for 40 years. I think Deborah was a judge for 80 years, twice 40, and Shimshon was a judge for 20, which is half of 40. 40 years is in general, these numbers have meanings. There are 40 lashes. We'll get to Sefer Dvarim later. When you get lashes in court, they're 40. Up to 40 lashes. Talmud is 39. But 40 years is a generation. That's what 40 years is. So we'll come to that. It's a very important point about the 40 years. Yes. Number 40 is a generation. It's I would say a transitional period. So we're in the desert for 40 years. And of course, that's the transition from first generation who were slaves in Egypt to the second generation that grows up in the desert. And the difference between the two generations in the desert for 40 years. Okay, we'll come back to that.
40 days? What about 40 days?
And by the way, and another very good example of 40 days, which was a real change, was the story of Noah and the flood. The waterfalls, the waters from above and below, they come into the world for 40 days, and the world has changed. When Noah leaves the ark, it's a different world. So the 40 days, number 40 is a transitional number, of course. 400 means 10 times 40. It's a vast number, many generations or whatever. All these numbers do have significance. 3, 7, 10, 40, these numbers have significance. And sometimes other numbers have significance within their context. That's another story. But that's a very important point.
Can I ask a quick question?
Go ahead, of course.
It's a little striking to me, not too, but a little bit, that Moshe says he didn't eat or drink for 40 days. It's almost like it doesn't fit in there. It's about him. I don't know.
Well, it's right. Well, let's leave that out. The not eating and drinking for 40 days. That's an important point, actually, and we'll get to that. Now, in the book of Devarim, Moshe is not eating for 40 days, which is picked up later in the Bible also, in a different context. Maybe we'll deal with that at some other point. But it's a very striking contrast to what the Torah said when Moshe comes down the mountain in chapter 24 with these additional commandments, and he reads to them the book of the covenant, the Sefer HaBrit, and there it says that the people went up by Yechezu et Elohim. These people, a representative group of people, went up the mountain, and it says literally, and they saw God, Vayochu Vayishtu, and they ate and drank. The Torah there in the book of Shemot is contrasting Moshe's reception of the Torah, which involves his not eating and drinking for 40 days, with the people's reception of the Torah, which is they beheld God, and they Vayochu Vayishtu. So your point is very well taken. Obviously, the not eating and drinking must have some deeper significance over here, but let's leave it for now. We'll come back to that. But it's a good point. Anybody else for any comments? Otherwise, we would just rush into this description of the golden calf episode. And remember, we're bearing in mind the differences between the two stories. The differences of two types, first of all. There's a lot of information that is present in the first story, which is not present in the second story. That's one kind of difference. The first story is much richer. So many of the details do not appear in story number two. And the second difference is some of the details seem to contradict. It's not just that they're not there, there are contradictory statements in story number two, which we will get to. And of course, the larger goal is always for us to figure out the significance. Okay, let's begin. Vayara'am ki boshesh Moshe loredet minahar. That's how the story begins. The people saw that Moshe boshesh was tarrying, was delayed in coming down from the mountain. Now, as Moshe had said earlier, Moshe had told them earlier, back in chapter 24, that he's going up the mountain. I'm leaving with you, Aaron. Aaron and Hur will be with you. If you have any issues or problems, you can talk to them. It was actually last week's Torah reading. I'm going to go up the mountain, and Moshe goes up the mountain, and his protege, his disciple Yoshua goes with him. And there the Torah said Moshe came into the cloud, the end of chapter 24, and he was in the mountain for 40 days and 40 nights. It doesn't mention there he didn't eat and drink. Nor does it say, I want to make this clear, nor does it say in chapter 24, nor does he tell the people, I'm going for 40 days and 40 nights. He doesn't say that. He says to the people, I'm going up to the mountain. I'm going to be on the mountain. That's what Moshe says. You wait here, says Moshe, in the end of chapter 24. You wait here together with the elders. And Aaron and Hur are staying with you. And Moshe leaves, and Moshe goes into the cloud, disappears from sight. And Moshe was there for 40 days and 40 nights. So it's not that in the pshat of the Chumash, it's not that he said 40 days and 40 nights. It never says that he told them. He says he's going away for some time. And the people here in chapter 32, they saw that Moshe was tarrying or was delaying from their perspective. Maybe Moshe had initially intended to go for 40 days. Maybe that's the time it takes. Moshe never said, I'm going for 40 days. But from the standpoint of the people feel or sense that Moshe is delayed in returning, and they're concerned perhaps he's not going to come back at all. And this will precipitate for them the request to construct a calf. That's the very first verse of chapter 32. Vayikohel amal Aaron, the people gathered around Aaron. Vayomru Elav, and they said to him, make for us a God that will walk before us. Kizem Moshe ha'ish, because the man Moses, Asher halanu me'eretz Mitzrayim, lo yodanu mehayolo. This is actually a very important verse for our purposes. What does it suggest to us, this passage? Let's say the following. Number one, the Torah gives a reason for the construction of this calf. The people have a reason. The people are concerned or worried because their leader who took them out, their guide, let's call Moshe their guide, has disappeared, and they suspect he's not coming back. It's already been a long time. He's not back yet. Again, I want to emphasize, he didn't tell them how long he's going for, but there's a concern, there's a fear. We need him to guide us. He's brought us to this point, and therefore we need something else to guide us. We need some kind of a God that will guide us. And the important point over here is, in the simple reading of the Chumash, this particular Elohim, as they call it, this being, divine being, is a replacement for Moshe. It's not a replacement for God. It's a replacement for Moshe. And I presumably what they're assuming is that somehow this thing they're going to construct, for whatever reason, will be able to receive perhaps messages from God. That was what Moshe was doing. Moshe was leading the people, but Moshe was relaying God's instruction. What it sounds like over here is that the people, out of fear, out of concern that Moshe will not return, want somebody to replace Moshe. In fact, when you read this pasuk, Kizem Moshe Ha'ish, for the man Moses that took us out of Egypt, we don't know what happened to him. What it sounds like is, what they're saying is, Moses was a great man, but he was a man. Here today, gone tomorrow. We can't live that way. We need someone who's going to be with us all the time. So let's create for ourselves an Elohim, make for us an Elohim that is not subject to time, that can always be with us. Because the man Moses, we don't know what happened to him. So here, let's reflect on this for a moment. It's not that they said, the simple reading of the Chumash. It's not that they said we want to replace God. They sounds like they still believe in God, the God that took them out of Egypt. But the God that took them out of Egypt is a distant God and a frightening God. They need something that is with them, something they can see, something they can touch, perhaps. That's what they need. And they go to Aaron. Remember, Moshe had said, I'm going up the mountain, I'm leaving Aaron and Hur with you. So they go to Aaron. But Moshe had told to them in chapter 24, Mibal Devarim Yigash Alehem. The end of chapter 24, the end of last week's Torah reading, whoever has a problem should approach them. They don't approach Aaron. They sort of surround him. Vayikoheo al Aaron. There's a sense of intimidation or a sense of demand. They're demanding that Aaron, in the absence of Moshe, make for them an Elohim. And Aaron's response in the third verse, Vayomer Alehem Aaron, Parku nizmei hazahav asher biyaznei nishechem, b'nechem u'b'notechem v'yaviu Elai. Aaron's response is, bring me the gold, says Aaron, the golden jewelry in the ears of your wives, of your children, sons and daughters. Bring it to me. And the people do such. Vayit parku kol ha'am et nizmei hazahav asher biyazneihem. The people brought the jewelry, the golden jewelry, which was on the ears of those people. Vayaviu el Aaron, and they brought it to Aaron. Vayikach miyadam, vayatzar oto bacheret, vayaseu egel masecha. So Aaron takes this and he sculpts it, a cheret. He takes this gold, he casts it in a mold, and he creates this golden calf. Molten calf. Vayomru, and the people said, Ego Elohecha Yisrael asher halucha me'eretz Mitzrayim. This is your God, O Israel, who brought you up out of the land of Egypt. Vayar Aaron vayiven mizbeach ufanav. Aaron saw this and built an altar. Vayikra Aaron vayomar Chag Lashem Machar. Aaron said to the people, Chag Lashem Machar. Very important. A Chag Lashem. That's the name of God. Yudhe Vavhe. Tomorrow, a festival of Hashem. So again, it's not being presented here as these Elohim is replacing God. That's not what Aaron says. Aaron says to the people, Chag Hashem. This Elohim, this particular molten calf, is a connection to Hashem. Tomorrow, it's tomorrow. Vayashkimu mimacharat, the people got up early in the morning. Vayalu alot, vayagishu shlamim, and they brought sacrifices, burnt offerings, goodwill offerings, alot and shlamim. Vayashav ha'am lechov l'shtot. Vayeshav ha'am lechov l'shtot. The people sat down to eat and drink. Vayakumu l'tzachek, and they rose l'tzachek. L'tzachek is often a negative word, to make merry. Sometimes it has a sexual meaning, but they began. They're very involved. They got up to perhaps to dance. We see later on that Moshe comes down the mountain and he sees they are dancing. Let me ask you a question. This is what the people do. And now with Moshe's on top of the mountain, let's just read a couple more verses, 2 more verses here. Vayedaber Hashem el Moshe. God said to Moshe, Lech reid, go down. Ki shichet amcha asher ha'aleita me'eretz Mitzrayim. The people you brought up Egypt have corrupted themselves. Saru maher min haderech asher tzivitim. They very quickly have left the path that I commanded them. Asu lahem egel. They made for themselves a molten calf. Vayishtacha below. They bow down to it. Vayizbechulo, they brought sacrifices to it. Vayomu, and they said, Elu Elohecha Yisrael, Asher halucha me'eretz Mitzrayim. Right, that's what God says to Moshe. Let me ask you a question: is that what in the book of Devarim? Is that what Moshe's retelling the story? Is there a difference between what Moshe describes, relates in the Sefer Devarim, and what the Chumash says here in the book of Shemot? I got to tell you something before you respond. That what I want to say, and maybe you'll say it yourselves without me even having to say it. I've taught the story of the golden calf multiple times, and what I'm going to say, or you're going to say, I never saw it before. Actually, I never realized this before. It's something very basic, actually, and when you see it, it's obvious, and maybe you'll see it yourselves. That there's a difference here between the two stories. And what is that key difference between the two stories? Apart from what's not in the story, in other words, that the reason for the golden calf is present in the book of Exodus. It's not present in the book of Devarim. There's no reason given except that Moses seems to say, that's what you always do. From the day I know you, you've always been the same. You've been wayward from the day I know you. Mamrim heitem Hashem. So there's no particular reason
So it's not in the role of what Aharon really did, that he shaped it. It's not about that.
It doesn't matter. We'll get to Aaron later on.
Okay.
Aaron, we'll get to Aaron later on. All right, let me just go back. I don't know where you stopped hearing me. Let me just make the following point. That in the book of Devarim, it never says that the people worship the golden calf. It never says that. Here in the book of Shemot, it says it clearly. It says the people got up early in the morning, they brought sacrifices, and they got up to eat and drink, and they got up with tzachek, and God says to Moshe, go down the mountain. They've strayed from the path very quickly. They made themselves a molten calf. Verse number 8, Vayishtach, they bowed down to it, Vayizbuch, they sacrificed to it, and they said, these are your gods, Israel, who brought you up out of the land of Egypt. But in Sefer Devarim, it never says they worshipped it. Look at that text. It never says it. It says they made a golden calf. God said to Moshe on the mountain, the people have very quickly departed. Asu lahem ego masecha. They made a golden calf. Moshe comes down the mountain in the book of Devarim, and he sees the calf. That's what it says. In our chapter, in chapter 9, he went down the mountain, and Moshe says, Va'era, I saw in chapter 9, we just read it before, verse number 14. Verse number, I think it's 16, verse 16. Va'era v'nei chatotem Hashem Elohechem, asitem lochem egel masecha. You made a molten calf. Saratim maher min haderech. You've strayed from the path. But it never says he sees them worshiping it. Unlike Shemot. In Sefer Shemot, we're told God says they bow down and they sacrifice. And not only that, when Moshe comes down the mountain in Sefer Shemot, and he comes down with the tablets, which is later on, and in verse number 19, chapter 32, verse 19, Moshe comes down the mountain, he sees the calf, and he sees the dancing. Vayicharaf Moshe. So in the book of Devarim, I just want to point this out. Now we assume when we read it, I assumed that the people made the golden calf and they were worshiping it. But I want to just point out, it never says that. It says nothing of the sort. It says they made the golden calf. It completely avoids saying, I would say, that they actually bow down and they sacrifice and they said, these are your gods. That's not present in Sefer Devarim. And the question is, why? What do we make of that? I want to come back to that later on. I think it's a very important point, and I will suggest that it's part and parcel of Sefer Devarim. But
did Moshe know all those details? Did Moshe know? Did Moshe know all the details about Aaron making it and what they said to him? Is it possible Moshe didn't know those details?
it's possible we'll see what Moshe knows in Sefer Dvarim. In Sefer Shemot, he does confront Aaron. I mean, the question of Aaron's role is a central question, but the question also is the response to Aaron in the two stories is very different, as we will see. There's a whole range of differences over here, and the trick is to see what they are, and then to try to make sense of it. In other words, there are two different accounts over here. That's obvious. And the question is how each account, let me put it this way. To say they're two different accounts, that's self-evident. We don't need read it, the two different accounts, in many ways. The real question is not whether there are two different accounts or not. Obviously, there are. The question is, what is the focus of each account, and how does that work with the book? These stories are not in a vacuum. These are stories written within the context of the book. For example, the story of the golden calf in the book of Shemot is a story within a story. The story that surrounds the golden calf are the instructions to build the Mishkan from chapter 25 all the way through chapter 31. And the story that follows the golden calf is the building of the Mishkan, chapter 35, 36, 37, 38, 39, and 40. So the golden calf episode is a story within a story. If there would be no golden calf, Moshe would come down the mountain and they would build the Mishkan. So when you're studying the golden calf episode in Shemot, you're studying it within the context of Sefer Shemot. What's striking in Sefer Dvarim is there's no mention of the Mishkan at all. We'll get to that later on. There's no mention of the Mishkan at all over here. Moshe says you've always been angered God. And for example, let me single out one example, says Moshe. At Horeb, at Sinai, we have the episode of the golden calf. But the book of Devarim in general, I think it's fair to say that Sefer Devarim in general does not barely mentions the Mishkan at all. In one place, it talks about going to the place that God will choose 3 times a year. But there's really no discussion of besides that, there's no discussion of the Mishkan. There's no discussion of the priests working in the Mishkan. None whatsoever. It is conspicuously absent from the book of Devarim. Whereas in Sefer Shemot, it's front and center. It's the culmination of the book. The book ends with the people building the Mishkan and God dwelling in their midst. So that's a story within that. That's completely missing in Sefer Devarim. We're going to try to understand this in more detail. It's going to take us another session at least, but we're going to get to this to try to work this all out. Now, as far as Aaron is concerned, okay, Aaron plays a very central role in the story in Sefer Shemot. He actually, number one, he actually makes the calf. Not only does he make the calf, but the question I think the Torah raises for all of us is, what exactly is Aaron thinking? Because on one hand, he does make the golden calf. There's no question. And actually, Moshe calls him on it in Sefer Shemot. Moshe says to Aaron, what did you do? This is found later on in chapter 32, right? And verse number 21 it is, I think? 21. Chapter 32, verse 21. Vayoma Moshe Aaron me'osa lecha amazeh. Ki aveita alav chata'a gedolah. Moshe said to Aaron, what did you do? Or what did the people do to you that you brought upon them such a terrible sin? What did they do to you? How did they coerce you to do this? Or maybe it means, what did they do to you in the past that you hold such a grudge against them that you would cause them to sin? However you understand it. But Moshe calls them on it. What is this? And Aaron responds, don't be angry, my Lord. You know the way these people are. They're in a bad way. Kiburahu. And they said to me, make for us a God that will walk before us. He repeats what the people said, and we just read it before. For the man Moses who took us out of Egypt, we don't know what happened to him. For Amar I said, who has gold? And they took the gold off and they gave it to me. I threw it into the fire. Vayetzea Egel Hazeh, and this calf came out. So Aaron is called by, right? And Aaron is called by Moshe on this. And Aaron gives some kind of a response, which is a very interesting response. The question is how to understand Aaron's response. Because the response, and to me, this is one of the critical passages about Moshe and Aaron. The different kinds of leadership that each one has. That for Moshe walks down, comes down the mountain, there's a golden calf. People are dancing around it. Smashes the tablets. He says to Aaron, what's going on? How could you do this? How could this even happen? What is this? And Aaron gives an explanation. He says, you know the way the people are. You know they're in a bad way. Kibarahu. And I said, who has gold? And they gave me the gold. I threw it into the fire, and this is what came out. Now, on one hand, what do you mean you threw it into the fire and this is what came out? The Torah said earlier, Vayatzer oto bacheret. He sculpted it out. It didn't just come out. He actually made the golden calf. The Torah goes out of its way to say how he made it. Vayatzer oto bacheret. That's not this doesn't come out. So from that perspective, Aaron is not telling the truth. Why do people lie? People lie typically because they're afraid, because they feel guilty. They don't want to confess the mistake. That's one possibility. It is true that what he says is not true. It's false. On the other hand, what he says, I think, actually is true. In the sense that what Aaron is saying is, I had no idea that this would ever happen. The people wanted a golden calf to replace you, Moshe.
And it's something.
I didn't imagine that after I created this golden calf, that the people would assume that this golden calf is not just like a kind of replacement for you. It's even to some extent a replacement of the God who took us out of Egypt. So what he says is actually there's a sense that it's really true. In other words, the Chumash goes out of its way in the episode of the golden calf. It's a much more elaborate, it's a much more severe sin because it's actually bowing down and worshiping, etc. On the other hand, there's a complexity to it. Number one, we know why they do it. They do it out of fear, out of concern. Moshe's gone, they're worried, they're frightened, etc. And second of all, it seems like a process. What begins one way ends up in a very different way. It begins as a means to an end. And what happens, though, is that the means becomes an end in and of itself. The means becomes not just a replacement for Moshe, but a connection to God. But more than that, not just a connection, sounds like a kind of additional God. It's giving this object that they create, it's assuming a certain godlike quality. And therefore you bow down and you worship and etc. And you say, you're the one who took us out of Egypt, etc. So what Aaron says, I think, there's a truth to what he says. But he said, I had no idea it would turn out this way, he says. It turned out this way, but I had no idea. So this is, maybe I should have known better. Now I did concede, says Aaron, to what they wanted to do, because I know the way they are. If I would say no, who knows what they would do? Maybe they would kill me. Maybe they would do it anyway. And this way I can control it to some extent. And he did say, Chag Lashem Machar. He did say tomorrow is a festival Lashem. So you get a sense over here how the Chumash manages in very few words to present a very complicated picture of Aaron. And I think it's also, and Moshe has a different way to see the world. Aaron is the person who was chosen in the first place because he can speak to the people. He's a people person. As a people person, he understands them and he's willing to compromise to some degree with who they are, to deal with the reality of who they are. And Moshe is a different kind of leader. Moshe doesn't make compromises of that type. Moshe has this one standard for Moshe, and he doesn't care how the people are. It's irrelevant to him. He cares about a certain standard. If they can adhere to the standard, that's great. If they can't, that's too bad. Maybe someday they will learn what he's trying to teach them. So you have really in these few verses a completely different picture of Moshe and Aaron as leaders. On the other hand, there's a very striking difference between something else relating to Aaron in the two stories. And that is, what we read before, is that in Sefer Devarim, when Moshe talks about the golden calf, Moshe says he came down the mountain and he prayed for the people. And then we have in our chapter, in chapter 9, we find that pasuk that we read before, chapter 9, verse number 16. But in any event, here's the point I'm making, that when it comes to Aaron in the book of Devarim, in verse number 20 of our chapter, Moshe prays for the people in verse 19. God could destroy the people. But in verse number 20, it says, Uvi Aaron hitanaf Hashem od hashmido. Aaron also, God was angry. God wished to destroy Aaron. And I prayed for Aaron as well at that time. But in the book of Shemot, it doesn't mention that God wished to destroy Aaron. It says that Moshe says to Aaron, what did you do? But there's no suggestion whatsoever in Sefer Shemot that God wishes to destroy Aaron. Another question is why? What is the difference between the two stories? Why is it that in Sefer Shemot Aaron's demise is not mentioned, but in Sefer Devarim it is mentioned? So I want to make two suggestions about this point. I think it's a very important point, and obviously a glaring difference between the two stories. And I would say the following: that there's another core difference between the two stories, the most basic difference between the two stories. Apart from the fact that I think that in Sefer Devarim, it never says they worship the golden calf. We'll come back to that later, soon. But there's another difference. The story in Sefer Shemot, the episode of the golden calf in Sefer Shemot, Moshe is informed on the mountain by God that God has seen the people, they worship the calf, they bow down, etc. Says God to Moshe, I will destroy the people and I'll make a nation out of you. That you have in both stories. But the difference is, and this is the core difference, that in Sefer Shemot, Moshe is still on the mountain. In Sefer Shemot, Moshe appeals to God on the mountain. And that begins with the verse, Vayichal Moshe et Pnei Hashem Elohav. Moshe entreated God on the mountain, which is the reading for fast days. Vayichal. Moshe says to God, you can't do this. You can't destroy them. First of all, it's going to look bad for you. People will say he couldn't do it. And maybe he even intended initially to destroy them when he took them out. And number two, you made promises to Avram, Yitzchak, and Yaakov. You promised they're going to bring their descendants into the land. You got to keep your promise. That's what Moshe says to God. So first of all, God, it looks bad for you. You got to think about yourself over here. It looks, but what are people going to say about you? You seem very concerned about your reputation back in the land of Egypt. They're going to talk about me. They'll know I'm God. They know I'm the greatest God. They're going to say bad things about you. That's what Moshe says. And secondly, you got to keep your promises. And God was regretted. And God relented of the evil that God intended to do to the people. Chapter 32. The next verse, Vayifen Vayered Moshe Menahar. Moshe went down the mountain. That's the story in the book of Exodus. What is the story that we just read in the book of Devarim? It doesn't say anything about Moshe's prayer on the mountain. Moshe, I was on the mountain for 40 days. God gave me the tablets. God said, go down from here. People have corrupted themselves. I'll get rid of them. I'll make you a nation. Next verse. I turned and went down the mountain. That's not the story in the book of Exodus. The story in the book of Exodus, he prays on the mountain. And God vayinachem, and God relents of the evil. That's a core difference between those two stories. I want to focus on that because that is in my view, the core difference. And I want to say the following. The book of Exodus story, the story of the golden calf, the real story of the golden calf begins when Moshe comes down the mountain. But the reader knows in the book of Exodus that as Moshe goes down the mountain, we all know that God does not intend to destroy the people. It's not about destroying the people. It's a different focus. It's altogether different focus, which is God won't destroy the people, but what is the relationship with the people? It's about the relationship to the people. The destroying them is off the table because Moshe succeeds on the mountain before he comes down. God relents of the evil. God's not going to destroy them. God's going to keep the promise one way or the other. How it's going to work, what the relationship is, etc., etc. That's the whole description in the book of Exodus. God will say soon afterwards, listen, they can go into the land. I don't want to go with them. I'll send an angel. Because God intends to keep the promise. But on the other hand, we don't get along. We can be friends, but we certainly cannot live together. That's for sure. That's what God says to Moshe. And Moshe is going to try and negotiate it where the people in God can dwell together. That's the story of the golden calf in the book of Exodus. But over here in Devarim, God says to Moshe, I'll destroy the people and make a nation out of you. Moshe goes down the mountain. Moshe doesn't pray yet. Moshe only prays afterwards. That's a glaring difference. Now, the relevance of what I'm saying to the question about Aaron is this. Aaron in the book of Shemot is chosen for one reason. Because he can talk the language of the people. Moshe had said to God, Moshe doesn't want to go. I can't speak. People don't know who I am. Pharaoh doesn't recognize me. I'm a bad speaker. I'm kvad peh. I can't speak well. And he has all kinds of excuses for not going. And each time God responds, that's okay, I'll take care of that. That's okay, I'll take care of that. And finally, Moshe says to God, listen, shlach na b'yad tishlach, get somebody else. I don't want to go. And God gets angry. And God says, listen, you go. Your brother Aaron, Yodati ki daber yidaberhu, he's a very good talker. It's clear that when you read the story in the book of Exodus, say for Shemot, God doesn't want Aaron. That's the story in the beginning. God says to Moshe, you go. I can't go. How am I going to go? I'm going to be with you, says God. Don't worry about it. Me and you, we'll take care of it. You go as my messenger. And Moshe refuses. So Aaron was chosen in that description of Aaron. There are multiple descriptions of Aaron throughout the Bible, but in that description, Aaron is only chosen because he talks the people's language. In other words, Aaron actually represents the people. Aaron reflects the people. So in the book of Exodus, when Moshe says to God, you can't destroy them. You can't destroy them because you made a promise to expand for you. And God says, okay, I'm not going to destroy them. Once God said that on the mountain, I'm not going to destroy them, there's no reason to pray for Aaron. Because if God's not going to destroy the people, God's not going to destroy Aaron. Because Aaron represents the people. So the danger to Aaron is not a factor in the story. Complete non-factor in the story. Now, the Torah presents a complex picture of Aaron. And on one hand, he does make the golden calf. On the other hand, he's giving in to the people. Maybe he's trying to delay it, come back. Chag Hashem machar. There are different ways to read Aaron. We can't fully justify it, but we can certainly mitigate it. But this is the reality of the people. You have to compromise with them. You've got to try to work with them. But maybe we can move them in a better direction. Chag Hashem machar. And Aaron says to Moshe, I tried, but it came out the wrong way. It wasn't my intention. In any event, but in the book of Devarim, in our book, Moshe comes down the mountain. It never says that God relented of the evil. The people are in danger of being destroyed. If the people are in danger of being destroyed, then Aaron is in danger of being destroyed. Aaron is the people. That's the way I understood it in the past, and I will stick to it. But I wanted to add an additional thought that occurred to me just yesterday. And coming back to what I began with in this particular meeting, which is that in the book of Devarim, it never says they worship the golden calf. It says something very different. They made a golden calf. And you make a golden calf, it can lead to worship a golden calf. But the focus in the story, there's not a suggestion, certainly nothing explicit, that the people are worshiping the calf. There's no bowing down, there's no sacrifices, there's no dancing. But there's a different danger, because when you make a golden calf, then already you're on a bad path. And in fact, we have to remember that in the Ten Commandments, it talks about making idols, not just worshiping them. Don't make idols. And if you talk about making the idols, at the end of the day, Aaron made the idol. That's what I said before, and a little while ago. If you assume knowledge of the first story, Aaron made the calf. Since the making of the calf is the entire focus, therefore it makes sense that the one who actually made the calf, which is the real crime in Devarim, has to be held accountable. So Moshe says Aaron also was in danger, and I prayed for Aaron at that time. So there are two suggestions I'm making here about why Aaron is different in the two stories. The first suggestion, though, that is very important because it's pointing out a core difference between the two stories. In the story in the book of Exodus, the focus is not whether they live or die. The people will live. The focus is what the relationship will be. And as we'll see, maybe we start it now, we'll continue with it next week. This is the key story. And in Sefer Devarim, it's very different. The people are truly in jeopardy in Sefer Devarim. And God gives the Torah to Moshe. Just to let me just make one other comment, and I'll stop and take comments and questions. I come back to the first point about the golden calf episode in Exodus. It's a story within a story. The larger story is the building of the Mishkan. And God said to Moshe, they people should build me a holy place. V'shachanti b'tocham, I will dwell amongst them, plural. That's the goal, to be God's people, that God dwells amongst the people. The golden calf prevents that from happening. So the golden calf has to be atoned for in order to move forward and to arrive at the goal of the book, which is that the people create a community in which God can dwell in their midst. Sefer Devarim doesn't have any temples. The temple is not, God is not dwelling in their midst in Sefer Devarim in general. God's up in heaven. It's a different conception of what the community is. So with Sefer Devarim, it's a completely different focus. The focus in Sefer Shemot is the people. Moshe in Sefer Devarim, in Sefer Shemot, is basically he's a middleman. He's a broker. The real issue is the people in God. Moshe is essential as a middleman. He's the one who's he represents us to God and God to us. He's the great prophet. He's the great visionary. He's the guide. He's the teacher. But at the end of the day, the focus is not Moshe. Moshe enables us to dwell in God's presence. Book ends with the building of the Mishkan. As we'll see, maybe next time, Sefer Devarim presents Moshe in a very different way. We'll come back to this. There's 1,000,001 issues over here. And there's a lot more to say about this. Let me stop here for a moment to take comments or questions.
All right. I just want to start things off with a comment from chat from a bit earlier from Aviva. As to leadership, Aaron doesn't take responsibility for his actions. That is an important value in the Bible, elaborated in the story of Joseph's brothers.
That is certainly true. There's a failure of responsibility here. But I would say that actually, I totally agree with that. That there's on the other hand, I think if you want to look at it from a more positive standpoint, there are different kinds of leaders. There are leaders who actually are able to speak to the people and to move them forward. That's one kind of leadership, and Aaron represents that. He says to look, this is where they are. This is the reality of the people. They're a bunch of slaves. They're problematic. I have to deal with the reality, So I want to move them a bit forward. That's one kind of leadership that Aaron represents. Aaron is a beloved leader. He's a wonderful person in the Bible too. But that's how he deals with his community. He wants to move the people forward, and Moshe represents a different kind of leadership. Moshe is a visionary. He has a picture of the way the world should be, and his ideas. You present the way the world should be, and you hope that people are able to respond to that, and to figure out a way to transform themselves and to live differently. And sometimes it takes a generation, and sometimes it takes many generations. And that's a different kind of leadership. I've always argued that we need both kinds of leaders. You need someone who has a vision of what the way the world should be, and I'm going to hold that standard. This is the standard we have to try to get to. And on the other side of it, you have the leaders who say, "This is my community. I can make all kinds of statements, but no one's going to listen."
Rabbi?
And Moshe would say, "I don't care. It's not relevant. They won't listen today. Maybe they'll listen in 10 years. Maybe their grandchildren will listen." That's very different.
Correctly, I think Ahad Ha'am wrote an essay about Moshe and Aharon.
I'm not familiar with it.
Both.
Rabbi,
yes.
But Midrash is still so troubled by Aaron's behavior. I mean, we can defend it and we can make excuses and all of them can be legitimate, but the basic fact is that he lied. He said, "I didn't do it." Anyone who's dealt with children knows they'll say, "I didn't do it. It happened." I mean, that's a thing. It's just
clearly
poor behavior. But
I'm not saying right. I'm not defending Aaron. I'm trying to understand it. I'm
right.
saying
No. I see that, but then we get the Midrash is so troubled by it that they develop an entire discussion of that the people appealed to him and were about to kill him. I mean, they're so troubled by the way he acted and the way he.
Well, there is some truth to that. I was trying to kill him. That we don't have. The Medrash claims that Hur, the other guy, was in fact killed. That's number one.
Mm-hmm.
But by Yikahel Ha'am al Aaron, I started by saying that they gathered around him. Is not what Moshe had said. Moshe said to the people, "I'm leaving. If you have a problem, you should approach them gingerly."
Mm-hmm.
That's what Moshe said. And Vayikahel al Aaron is not approaching him gingerly. It's actually standing too close to him, surrounding him, etc. That's very different. So I think there is a sense of kind of intimidation of Aaron. I think what's interesting over here is how the Chumash manages in just a few verses to put forward a very complex picture. But there's no sense in the Torah that the Torah justifies it, because the very next verse says that God that talks about the gold, the calf that people made, which Aaron had made. Al asher asu ta'ego asher asa Aaron. The Chumash is black and white. It doesn't say it doesn't give him doesn't simply say he did the right thing. He said even by the way, as a leader, even if his intentions were good, at the end of the day, the result was a bad one. And as a leader, you got to take responsibility for that in any event.
What would have happened, Rabbi? So what would have happened? I mean, if we would do a Rosencrantz and Guildenstern vision of this, what would have happened if Aaron had told them, "We have to wait for Moses. He will come back." What if he had given the pat or whatever we know and hadn't done this? What would happen?
I don't think we can answer that kind of question. But if he was, but if he had done that, he wouldn't be Aaron. I would say the following: that's not who he is. So if he had done that, he wouldn't be the Aaron that deals with the people in that way.
It's a huge problem for me. I mean, the fact that he actually built it and the fact that he said, "Well, it just happened. I didn't do it." It's a problem.
It is a problem, but the Chumash deals with that problem. Maybe next week I'll talk about it. Okay. It's not our problem that we're discovering that the text is unaware of. The text is very, very aware of it, and I can demonstrate that by a different text. The Torah is very aware of the fact that it says it explicitly, God was angry about the calf that they made, which Aaron had made. Asher asa Aaron. Let me take one other comment and question.
Isn't the story of Aaron in the Gemara talks about one of the subjects that you can't delve too much into, just like Reuven's story or Amnon's story? Isn't Aaron also one?
I think Aaron is mentioned. Yes, I believe that is true.
You don't go deeply,
or
remember it's disturbing.
Right. It's clear that that means that the Gemara is aware of the fact that the Aaron story is very problematic. But our job is to learn the Torah, so that's all. But my point is that what the Medrash does in trying to defend them, okay, maybe they go overboard, but there's but they're picking up on something that is real in the story. That's what he's saying. He's saying, I didn't anticipate this. He's saying that I didn't realize how it would end up. And he's saying, correctly or incorrectly, this is who they are. And, let's not kid ourselves. This is who they are. Okay, but we'll pick this up next time as well. Let me take one more comment.
You made a contrast between the two different situations, and I didn't clearly understand what the second situation was. In the first one, it's whether God will be living among the people. And in the second situation, could you elaborate that a little bit?
I'll elaborate next week because that's
next week. Okay.
I didn't get to that part yet.
Okay.
There are many more differences between the two stories, but we've touched upon a bunch of them now. We'll continue next week with the. This is one of the core stories, obviously, both in Sefer Shemot and Moshe's retelling is very interesting, and we will see next week that the story is very different, and we have to try to figure out how it relates to the book in general, how it relates to the book of Exodus in general that we understand, because the book of Exodus is about the people becoming God's servants, becoming God's people, and Moshe is trying to make that happen. But at the end of the day, the relationship is the God and the people. And in Sefer Devarim, I think it's a different kind of relationship. It's also God and the people, obviously, but Moshe has a different role, which we'll get to next week. We'll stop at this point. Sorry about this, my computer not working for whatever reason. I am in Israel now. Maybe that's a factor. I don't know. In any event, we'll continue next week.
All right.
Thank you all.
And I would like to highlight some upcoming classes. First, Mishnah in Depth is starting a new Sefer Kritot with Rabbi David Silber. If you would like to hear more learning with Rabbi Silber on the Mishnah Yomi cycle, please sign up at drisha.org/classes to get weekly videos emailed to you and follow along the series. We also have the Classic Jewish Bookshelf, Part 2, with Dr. Rachel First, starting this week at 1 p.m. Eastern, as well as the final session of Queen of Modern Politics, How Esther Inspired America and Europe, with Rabbi Stu Halpern, a lovely pre-Purim prep class, on Wednesdays at 12 p.m. Thank you all for joining. See you all next week, and check out our upcoming offerings at drisha.org/classes.